Hey everyone, this is Pete Heiniger, and welcome to another edition of Stages Podcast. I don't know how many of you are super interested in like true crime dramas and stuff like that, but like I'm kind of a freak about them. Like I watch all kinds of true crime documentaries and everything from I've watched stuff on the Zodiac Killer to I've watched some stuff on the Golden State, maybe murder, different thing like that. And then I'll do other true crime. But lately, I got my wife hooked in to some of the more dramatic things, because some of them are more like documentaries. But then, if you know, like Hulu and some other groups have kind of dramatized some of them, and they're more dramatic and have actors. And one of those is called Under the Banner of Heaven, and it's a series that Andrew Garfield, who also played Spider-Man among others things as an actor, is one of the main characters, or the main character in this series. And it's based on these murders that happened that were kind of centered around a splinter group off of Mormonism that kind of went super uber fundamental and all kinds of stuff. And I'm not going to ruin it for you or kind of spoil anything, so there doesn't need to be a spoiler alert. I'm not going to go there, but in there, that character is had some resonance with me. There were some things that I felt like that I shared, and I think one of those things is just like when you kind of like when you look at something that you've believed your whole life, or that you've thought your whole life, and then you all of a sudden really are faced with researching that. You start to have doubts around that. You start to question things around that, and maybe call into question maybe either your beliefs or your opinion or your position. And I know that that's probably happened for all of us to some degrees on all kinds of fronts, right? I know that it could be in politics, it could be in our opinions of different things, that as we grow older, maybe hopefully we get more mature. Sometimes we can get more immature, and our in the way that we change some things. But I found resonance in that the main character and another character, sub character in that whole show, that TV series, that true crime drama, Under the Banner of Heaven, started to take a deeper dive. And I think that relates to me as far as Stages goes. With I'm always trying to ask the question, how could we do a better job as society, as culture, as a church? And I know not all of us who are listening, not all of you share faith tradition, or even necessarily have to believe in God. And certainly Stages podcast isn't designed in such a way or intentional about like, oh, it's only for Christians or anything like that. That's not the case. I will tell you and be very upfront always that I am a person of faith and a believer in Christ. And so I just want to tell you, you're going to hear that, and I'm going to be honest with you, but it's not going to be dripping with that all over. I'm going to try to ask questions that I think all of us would ask, whether we're people of faith or not, if that makes sense. So there's my quick sort of disclaimer about that. But so let's talk about that. Let's, as we take a deep dive into cancer and cancer fighting, and some of us can't help but take a deep dive, because when you get diagnosed and you're on the journey as a cancer fighter, it's kind of forced upon you, right? But I'm excited because I think as I watch that true crime drama and I look at some of the things that they question, and just how we deal with things, and how we respond to things, and is there a better way to respond, and whatnot, that I felt a lot of similarity and commonality with that when it comes to cancer fighting. And so I wanted to talk about that today briefly, and just and bring that up. I think one of the things that for me that I'm going through is that my cancer journey Um, like a lot of people, but also not always like a lot of cancer fighters, has been a long journey. That's now several years, without resolution, right? There's sometimes where we're on this cancer journey, and for some of us, we can be, we get the diagnosis, we go through the chemo, we go through treatments, maybe we have some surgery and radiation, and then all of a sudden it looks like we kind of nipped it, but we always know we got to go through scans and we got to go through things, and that we're never quite out of the boat, right? That it could come back, that we have to be on guard. And so in that sense, I guess that could be considered kind of a long journey, because there is some things that impact us mentally and spiritually when we go through those challenges, right? Because that still hits you mentally, and you don't ever feel like you're quite free of cancer. And so there's kind of a long journey like that, right? And then there's the other side of that, which is a long journey where, for me, in my experience at least, I'm not out of it. We thought temporarily, just real briefly, that the last two surgeries were going to kind of eliminate cancer. All the cancer that we could see, we decided to go in and surgically remove. And so they took a part of my colon, they took apart parts of my liver, and it looked like, hey, everything's on the mend. But because, of course, I'm stage 4, that means cancer is still in my bloodstream. And so what happened was, while I was in recovery and not on chemotherapy or anything that could kind of kill any cancer cells in my bloodstream, cancer in my bloodstream went to different other areas of my body, and actually was in more places after surgery than it was before, prior to surgery. And so, that's, after 27 rounds of chemo, radiation, multiple surgeries, and now I'm on a new treatment called Phesgo, and I last week was my second round of that. So that's kind of another kind of definition of long journey. I haven't I'm not on the, well, cancer's gone and we're just in scans. I'm in this, the fight is ongoing and long. So I am very thankful and hopeful, in the fact that I'm still in the fight, and I can affect those cancer numbers, and the Phesgo has been putting my cancer marker number down again. And so we're still in it to win it, and everything's moving forward. And it's the treatment is successful. I'm not out of the woods, and I'm still fighting, and I still have cancer in my body. But the treatment is having success. Okay. And so in that sense, I'm grateful. That's not always the case, and it may not be the case with me in the future, and it certainly isn't always the case in with everybody that's listening, right? Or it's not the case for the loved one, right? Or it's not the case for the cancer fighter, but you may be a loved one who's in that fight and journey. So it's not the case for your loved one. But I'm always asking the question, like, how do we do a better, more effective job at creating support around things? And kind of the only thing I can speak into is something that is kind of along my journey, or something that I've experienced. I mean, because that's really all I'm really qualified to speak about. And even then, I think you've known through past podcasts, I don't always have all the answers. Kind of what you get is what we're learning along the way. And so my journey is definitely one where I have like lots of life lessons. So back to kind of the subject of Under the Banner of Heaven, and diving deep and having questions. I think starting out, relatively quickly in my diagnosis, way back, when I was first diagnosed, I'd had a conversation, and several conversations, but one in particular that I remember where, it made me concerned that I didn't want to drag everyone into this journey with me in a negative sense. And I think I had a perspective of like, oh, I can prevent that, or I can protect my family from that, or I can I will work hard to make sure that I don't drag them into this. But I have to say, like now being, a few years into this and, so far down the road, that some things are just out of your hands, right? There are just some things where you're having a treatment and the side effects have, a distinct impact upon your on your life. Like for me in my journey, there are plans that I've had to change, plans that I've had to cancel. I've had to send Shara like, hey, why don't you go enjoy this or do this with Sebra or our girls or with your friends or whatever, because I'm just not feeling up to it, right? And so in that sense, I don't have control over my symptoms and the side effects of maybe treatment and the medication that I'm on or a surgery or whatnot. And so I'm limited, and so that impacts our life, and I don't have any control over that, right? And so to that degree, no matter what I do, I can't keep my family from that, at least the people who are directly impacted by the fact that we could have gone to do something fun, we could have gone camping, we could have gone for a hike, we could have fill in the blank, but I couldn't enjoy that because of something I can't help, right? It's out of my hands. So the question is, like, again, as I look back and kind of like, let's say, like under the banner of heaven, I take a deeper dive and I look more closely at that. I think the question is there something to learn um, from this? And I think there is. I think there is something that that we as cancer fighters can attempt to do. And so I just wanted to talk briefly about some things that I feel like I haven't done a good job of, and yet I think there are learnings that now are going to push me to do a better job of. And so I think one is that we have got to continue to put the fight in fighter. And so there's a part in the long journey where you can kind of just, you get into that mode of like, hey, let's just kick the can down the road. So what I mean by that is that you just allow kind of this treatment and this little cycle that you're on. Like for me, like every 3 weeks I got to go in for treatment, and then I go through the side effects and I do all this. We can kind of kick the can down the road in the sense that we just get used to routine, and this is the routine, and this is what I do, and this is how I live, and this is, and if we're not careful, we just kind of grow accustomed to that, and we lose sight of the fact that that is really impactful upon the people that we're most close to, especially those who live with us and who are walking that journey more closely with us. Um, and we can kind of grow numb or unaware, or we just don't realize that it still impacts, right? The millionth time that your daughter wanted to go do something fun and wasn't able to because of your cancer, it may not be like have the same impact as it did the first time that you said, I can't do that, or I have to cancel plans. But actually for them, it's the reverse, right? The more often, the more consistent it's a no, or you can't, or anything, is more impactful, right? Like at the beginning, maybe there was hope. Okay, he's starting out in this journey, and it makes sense. But then, it continues to disrupt plans, and it continues to be a thing. Like the longer that goes, like the more impact, they're losing a portion of a life that they might have had with you had you not had cancer. Does that make sense? And so I think in that regard, we have to put the fight back in. And what I mean by that is sometimes we feel like fighting is just, I got to keep my head above water. And sometimes it feels that way. And so you just get into routine. But fighting is that we have to be committed to a fight in which maybe I'm willing to be inconvenienced. Maybe I'm willing to take a risk. Maybe I could have some side effects happen while I'm going camping, or hiking, or fill in the blank. And that might happen, but I'm gonna try it, and I'm gonna get out there and I'm gonna do it regardless. and I'm going to push through it. I'm going to put fight behind it. And maybe I am inconvenienced. Maybe I've got to use the restroom and get sick or whatever, while I'm out there. But better for me to fight through that and take that on as a fight I'm willing to take on, but still have the experience with my family and the getaway and the freedom, um, than to not do that, right? And I think, as with all human things, the more we say we give in to a cycle and a repeated behavior, the more it becomes habit forming for us. And so sometimes we're putting a hedge around our lives that doesn't necessarily need to be there. That maybe there isn't as much risk as we think, but we've grown accustomed to just saying, like, listen, I don't want to disappoint somebody. I don't want to disappoint my daughter or my wife or my caregiver or my friends. And so I'm just always going to say, I just, I can't really do that right now. When what we really need to do is get our act together and fight. So I want to encourage you that if you're a cancer fighter, try it. And I would say this to caregivers. Um, I know that sometimes you're reluctant to push your loved one, that your cancer fighter, but you need to. You need to push them and say, listen, hey, let's go on this trip. Let's go do that. And, we'll find a restroom, or we'll figure it out, or we'll get through it. I'm in it with you, but let's go enjoy this and try to do this because this is important. Okay. And so you can also help them kind of journey with them, because that does give us as cancer fighters support in knowing that, like, hey, we'll do that. So maybe if it, I just keep using camping because it's on my mind, because summer, like, winter is holding on forever here. I keep looking out the window if you want to know who I'm turning to. But outside, here in Colorado, winter seems to be holding on for forever. So we're in June, and it's still, we've gotten snow last week and whatnot. And so I'm kind of anxious for some warmer weather and less wind and other things, so we can get out and enjoy kind of the mountains and the beautiful scenery that we all love to live in Colorado to experience. That said, so camping's on my mind, so let me use that as an illustration. Camping, might mean that you have to call ahead, that you have to make sure that there's certain facilities, or there's some amenities that you may need because of your treatment and your symptoms and everything. So you've got to do more research, or be a better planner, and not be, like, hey, wing it. Maybe you've got to be careful with what food you eat, what food you bring, what your diet is when you're out there, to maybe alleviate some of those symptoms and different things like that. But that's just part of the fight, right? And so fight to live is what I would say. So put the fight back in fighter and fight to live. Don't let cancer dictate your life, because I have to say that I have failed at that. And I'm keenly aware of it. I feel terribly guilty about it. And yet I know that my daughters and my wife and my friends don't want me to feel shame or anything about that. But I do, because I'm the one who knows that at times I could choose to fight, or put in the work and put in the extra research and be able to do that. So I would say, in the spirit of Under the Banner of Heaven, and taking a deeper dive and looking deeper at my original commitment when I first started out, that I have grown lax in fighting for that original commitment, that I'm not going to make my family and my loved ones wear cancer with me, that I'm going to fight to try to, like, cancer doesn't get to dictate, we dictate the game, right? And I haven't been good at that. And so I want to say, first and foremost, that's one of the first things that I wanted to talk about. And so you've got to get the fight back in you, and you've got to dedicate yourself to it. And you also have to give yourself grace, right? So hopefully you're hearing from me and you're going, oh, and if you've done that, I hope that you're like recommitting and you're gonna challenge it, but also, hey, forgive yourself as I have to, because it's hard, right? It's so much easier to fall into routine and just play it safe. Um, but pretty soon, cancer is always going to fight to be the dictator of your life, to rule you and to own you. And so the only way to overcome that is to push back and fight against it and say, no, screw you. I'm not going to do that. You don't get to control my life. You don't get to take this away. You don't get to do that, because there's going to be plenty of times where some of that is taken from you. Your freedom is taken from you. You're in surgery, it's taken from you. You're in recovery, you're not allowed to lift things. For me, I had an ileostomy bag that kind of had its own set of limitations and whatnot. And so as you have those things and you experience those things, cancer is already going to win some of those. It's a given. Some of those battles are you're just going to lose. So that's why it's so much more important to fight for the spaces that it hasn't won, that it doesn't need to win, and make sacrifice in there. So that's my first encouragement. Put the fight back in fighter and fight to live. I need to hear that. You need to hear that if you're a cancer fighter. And if you're a caregiver, push and encourage and strongly encourage that. So that's the first point. I think the second thing is that as I go back and I research and I think about everything, I think that there's a part of the struggle and the battle where we've got to do a better job of putting cancer fighters with cancer fighters. That there's a certain part of this journey that you may need to process and verbally process. And the recipient should not be your spouse or your kids or your friends. That it needs to be somebody who's in a very similar battle as you. And that's because there's a certain part of this fight that only you can understand. And the only other person that might be able to understand it is somebody who's fighting through the same thing. And when you do that, it's encouraging. I think we've done a good job of that with things like addiction, like Alcoholics Anonymous and Celebrate Recovery and different things like that, where you are with people who are in that fight that understand that, and when you process things, they get it because they truly get it. And you can be helpful to one another. And I don't have a magical answer for all how that all happens, but I know that's up to us, right? We can't wait around for some non-cancer fighter or somebody who's now, has fought and won, they've beat cancer, to do it for us. I think that's a commitment that all of us as cancer fighters need to make, is that we've got to seek out other people who are cancer fighters, and we've got to be able to figure out a way to come together and talk and relate to one another. And so that's my second thing, is we've got to take action and find other cancer fighters. And that's super important, because eventually, over this long fight, this long journey that I'm on, if I don't do that, I risk either dragging my friends and family all into something, and then as I'm trying to process it and everything, they're not in it like you are. And so it either feels super negative, or the Debbie Downer all the time, or it's something they just can't relate to. They don't understand it the way that you do, right? And so even if you do process it with them, it almost makes you feel more alone than if you hadn't shared it, right? because they don't understand, or it doesn't resonate, or it doesn't grab their attention the way that you do, or they just listen, but they don't like kind of shoot anything back, because they don't if you don't, if you don't go through it, and you're not going through it and experiencing it, it's kind of hard to be able to spit out like some advice, or something that's helpful, because you truly just you can't understand it unless you've been there. Okay, so that's something that's not their fault. That's not their problem. That's where we have to find people, and that's on us, right? We can't just sit around and hope. Oh, I hope the church, or I hope people in general, or society, creates a group for all of us to, no. And you have to be careful, right? Because some of the groups that are online and stuff like that, people can be in various stages of mental health, and so there's some risk involved, and so you have to be wise. You have to be kind of, vigilant, in that you just can't join any group or be surrounded by just anybody, because in some ways some people are unhealthy, and they're just going to possibly pull you down the rabbit hole. So you got to be careful, right? We've got to be wise and discerning, and yet we've got to be proactive. And so I think that's, something that is required of each of us. And then lastly, I'm super um, you know emotional, or joyful, is that I think, as I think back, and again, I want to stay in this theme of kind of under the banner of heaven, and this idea of diving deep and questioning things, is that there is a significant place um, in our hearts and minds that we have to give to personal meditation and reflection. And I think if we don't do that, again, I think the routine of life kind of comes and chokes us off and drowns us out, and we kind of go through, we can end up going through life blindly, and we can miss so much. So let me kind of unpack that for you. We need to develop a routine that is daily. For some of us, maybe that's morning. For some of us, maybe you're a night owl, and the rest of the family's gone to bed, and you have more time at night. You have to kind of find that perfect time for yourself, but you need time to sit. And I think, pull out a notebook or an iPad or a phone or whatever. But I think you've got to come up with some questions that you think are base level questions that you need to consistently ask yourself daily. And that is like some of the questions that I need to wrestle with daily is, am I putting the fight into fighter? To what degree am I allowing cancer to dictate things for me? And, or you could spin it to a positive, is how many ways have I handed cancer its ass, and said, hey, I'm, I won that battle, or, and how many examples could I give of I'm winning the battle with cancer instead of cancer is defeating me? But there are a series of questions, and I think you've got to build them around the idea of not allowing yourself. I guess the easiest way to illustrate this is, um, many of us can go through life and we just don't ever question things. We maybe, we're a certain persuasion of politics, or we're certain, our religious faith beliefs, or something, and we didn't get there because we studied, or we asked questions, or we thought about, we took a deep dive and thought about that extensively. We actually just kind of inherited, or kind of took on the position that our parents had, or that our professor had, or that our friends who influenced us had. And so we kind of just adopted that and kind of go through life just happy as a lark, right? But we've not really called into question those things. And then if we were to put some reflection and take a deeper dive, we might find out that, man, I don't know that I would actually do that anymore, or that I would believe that anymore. Or, there's some things I think in my life that I had to understand about my upbringing, that I had to look at. And if I didn't pay close attention, I might not have noticed, right? I think a great illustration of this is the idea of misogyny. So, growing up in a culture that I would say, women were not blessed with um, influence and leadership and respect and opportunities. Um, but because that was so permeated within the culture that I was raised in, it was hard for me to even take notice. I If you would have asked me during certain periods of my life, did I value women? Did I hold them in high esteem? I would have said, yeah. But if I really would have questioned, if I really would have thought through it, I I wouldn't have drawn that same conclusion. I would have thought, you know what? Honestly, you're right. Like, they they haven't been women haven't been afforded the same opportunity that I am. That I have been guilty of listening to ideas and taking more seriously a male colleague over a female colleague, right? And so I know that in my life, I had to come to a place where I had to question that and answer the question honestly. And then, of course, when I could see it, then I had to do all I could to change, not just my belief and my practice and my actions, but I had to change. I had to be an instigator of change within my peer groups, the organizations in which I worked, and and other things. And so I think that's a great example of what I'm talking about. And so I think you've got to take a deep dive into just meditating and thinking about, are my thoughts around all of this healthy? Am I being proactive and really fighting and trying, or am I leaning back and giving up? Like, those are important questions to ask yourself, because I can say that there are certain areas where when I ask that on a daily basis, I don't have a good answer, right? It's not a fun answer to come to grips with. And so I think it's important. I think you really got want to probe into, um, how are you approaching this journey, and who's ultimately winning? Is cancer? Our circumstances? Is it a crapshoot? And I think those questions are something that you've got to plan daily. Not just every once in a while I'll visit that in my mind. I think you've got to make a routine and daily kind of revisit, like, how'd I do yesterday? How'd I do last week? You know, am I doing everything that I can to be as healthy as I can be? Am I making my friends and my family and my loved ones and my God and my faith, or whatever it is, for you, am I making those a priority? How much ground am I giving up to crappy pursuits, unfruitful conversations? I know in my life, if I'm honest, um, I'm sure just like most of you, I've had some things going on at work that frustrate me. Imagine that. And I've perseverated on them, and I'm a verbal processor. So I'm, those of you who have worked with me or know me, um, I like to process things out loud. And I can tell you right now that more days than I would love than I would like to admit, I've had a significant amount of my conversations that consume a significant amount of time um, be centered around unfruitful discussion that doesn't help me, doesn't move the needle forward for me, doesn't certainly doesn't move the needle forward to anyone that's in the discussion with me. And that's that's a hard one to accept. And I've got to do better at it. And I'll tell you right now, as I sit here and talk to you, I've not conquered that. I'd love to be like, check that off the list. I'd love to be able to tell you, yeah, I focus and I ask these questions and I spend time every morning in contemplation around it. And I've won that battle and I've figured that out. But I haven't. It's something that I continue to fight. So that's, again, kind of goes back to kind of wash, rinse, repeat, right? That means we have to put the fight back in fighter. And part of that fight is that we've got to reflect and take a deep dive and really consider, you know, how much ground are we giving up to this disease and the symptoms and the challenge and all of those things? How much weight are we allowing them to carry in our life to where they pull over and they start to make us look at other aspects of our life in a negative way instead of being positive, instead of going after it, instead of, you know, dealing with those challenges within our own minds and not having to share them with others. Those are things that we've got to weigh, right? It's a balance. There are some things that we have to share. There are some things that we need extra help. We need people to jump on board and be there for us and be true friends because we can't shoulder the burden ourselves and life wasn't meant to do alone. But there are also, if we're not careful, conversations that are completely unfruitful. They don't have any way to benefit us, and they have no way to benefit anyone else. And if we're not careful, we end up having more of those than we do productive, fruitful conversations. And the only way that I can see to overcome that in my life, in my journey, is to daily reflect on that and work hard and strive and then be held accountable and commit that to my wife, Shara, and to friends that, like, hey, help me and hold me accountable that I got to stop doing this. And it's hard. Sometimes you've really got to fight. That's why it's called a fight, right? It's not a fight if it's easy. And so those are things that are challenging, right? And so I want you to think through all the things that I've mentioned there. Like, you've got to put the fight back and fight to live. There are certain inconveniences and things that you can endure to give priority to your family and to your loved ones and to your friends and really to yourself, right? That you get out there and live life. There's also the next step is also being proactive to find other people going through what you're going through and process things with them, because they are truly the only ones who completely understand what you're going through, in most circumstances. And so there's an appropriate ears and appropriate shoulders, um, that can truly understand. And to some degree, your caregivers and your friends may not have the capacity or the ability to truly, process that with you, because they're not going through it and they've never been through it. And so that's on us. That's not, oh, woe is me, I don't know anybody to talk to. It's go find someone. Hey, we all sit in infusion. We all walk into, oncology offices, and there are people there right in front of us, who are opportunities to build friendships with and to be there for. And then that can reciprocate, they can reciprocate that to us. So we're surrounded by opportunities. We're surrounded by people who are fighting cancer. The question is, are we going to be proactive? Because that's an appropriate place, and those are appropriate ears and shoulders to hear and carry and share the burdens that we're going through. And so that's on us. And then lastly, again, daily come up with a set of questions that really is your way of holding yourself accountable to weighing in and taking a deep dive on, at the end of the day, who is winning? How much ground am I giving away to cancer? And again, cancer is going to win no matter what, some of that ground. But it's up to us on whether we're going to let it take all of our ground. And so that's a daily question. That's a daily thing that we've got to continue continue to ask ourselves. So I hope that was super helpful. Um, I hope that you, like true crime, dramas, and if you're like me, that you can kind of get inspired, by some of those things. There's certainly other aspects that I relate to, in some of that stuff, where I look at, the lives of individuals and characters, and in dramas and documentaries and different things like that, and I can use those things as inspiration, to kind of bring hope, back to focus in my life, because that is ultimately what Stages podcast and Stages is all about. That's why, I take the time to record these and share them with you, is because I want you to find hope in your life. I don't want you to live in a constant state of depression. I don't want you to live in a constant state of being defeated. I want you to understand there's joy and there's hope, for all of us, and it's not based on our circumstances. We can be going through, we can actually be in the middle of something where the cancer is winning and is going to win, right? And yet we still have our eyes set on the promises that God puts in front of us, and that we can find hope. So if you ever want to know more about hope, or you need somebody to encourage you, I just want to tell you, you're not alone. You're not alone in your journey. You never have to be. If you could, you can choose to be, and I can't help that. But I'm here. And if you're a caregiver, my wife, Shara, is here. So reach out to us, hit us with a direct message. You certainly can find Pete or Shara, Shara, Heiniger, Heiniger, on Facebook. You can find us, DM us. You can hit us on the Stages website, stages.community. If you're on my social media, you can be a part of the Pete's Posse group, and that's kind of my journey, and people are journeying with me. So there's lots of ways to find us and to ask us questions, and to not be alone on your journey. So reach out to us, contact us, if you feel alone, and we're here to listen and to help and to walk that journey with you. And so we love you. And until next time, this has been Stages Podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.